Hey y'all. All right. What we're going to do on this first video is not going to be very long because I'm going to just review a few things and then kind of finish naming three-dimensional figures like we talked about in class, all right, on last week. Then there'll be two more videos after this on measurement that you'll need to watch this week. But this first one, we're going to kind of review. I'm going to pull up a PowerPoint if it's a good day. So hopefully it will be. All right, so let's see if we can pull this PowerPoint up. Okay, now what we're going to be talking about again are three-dimensional shapes. Okay, so we went over three of them last time. So let's just review real quick about the first one was a sphere that we talked about. Now remember what a sphere is. It's a set of points that are equidistant. Remember that equal just means equal, the same distance from a point, like a fixed point called the center. So that would be like your center, okay? So if you measured from here to there, if that was 5 inches, then that would mean there to there would be 5 inches. That would mean there up to the top of the sphere would be 5 inches. That would mean here down to any point on the sphere would be 5 inches, okay? So if it were the set of points on a plane that were the same distance, that would be a circle. But if you took a fixed point and you measured like 5 inches, 5 inches, 5 inches in front, 5 inches in back, down here, and you connected all those points, you'd get a sphere. So for little kids, of course, they understand spheres because they're familiar with balls. But you'd want to bring in, kind of balls, a globe, those kind of things of different sizes. And similar to a circle, the radius joins any point, the center of the sphere, with any point on the sphere. So it doesn't have to be on what you think of as kind of an equator. If you went from that point up to that point, it's still going to be the same radius. Okay, the diameter will be just like on a circle and go all the way across. It would connect 2 points on the sphere and go through the center. All right, so sphere, you got that. All right, here's the other two we went over that I'm not going to cause you any trouble. A cylinder and a cone. Now remember what a cylinder is. Now a cylinder's got two bases. All right, so this circle on the top and this circle on the bottom. All right, those circles will be congruent, and when you connected every point on this circle with the circle on the bottom and you went all the way around connecting all the circle points on the top to the circle points on the bottom, that's what gives you a cylinder. So again, if you had kids, you'd bring in like cans of different sizes, maybe a paper towel roll, lots of different things that you could bring in to show them different kinds of cylinders. And like we said, mostly they're going to see circular cylinders, but they don't have to be circular cylinders. They can be other things. And again, like we talked about in class, if the circle on the top and the circle on the bottom are not right up under each other, when you started playing connect the dots, kind of hard to draw with this thing, your cylinder would be slanted. And the fancy math word for slanted is oblique. All right, it's in your book, and the fancy math word for straight up and down is right. Okay, but a cylinder has two bases. A cone only has one base. And again, it's usually a circle, but it doesn't have to be a circle. Okay, and then this top point up here is called a vertex, and it's directly above the center of this circle if the cone is right, because that would mean you had a right angle. So if you came straight down from the tip of that cone straight down to the bottom, you'd hit the center of the circle if you had a right cone. And similar to this, if this point was over here and then the circle was over here and the center of the circle was not directly underneath that vertex, then when you started playing connect the dot, again, you'd get a cone that what you think of would be slanted. All right, but most of the time in elementary school, they're going to have right circular cones and right circular cylinders. But I do want to make sure you understand that base doesn't mean bottom. So if I turned this can on its side, those circles would still be the bases. Same thing, when you're eating an ice cream cone, that circle's at the top because your ice cream's sitting down in that thing. But that circle is still called the base of the cone. So don't think that base necessarily means bottom, okay? But you do need to know that cylinders have two bases and cones have one base. Now, The two that I want to talk about that are new for you are prisms and pyramids. And so usually those are the two that people get a little bit confused on. So let me tell you some easy ways to remember. Let's talk about prisms first of all. All right, now there's a fancy word right here called polyhedron. Now, remember what a polygon is. A polygon is a two-dimensional shape whose sides are simple, closed, and line segments. So that shape is simple, that shape is closed, and all the sides are line segments when you've got a polygon, and a polygon is two-dimensional. A polyhedron is a three-dimensional shape, and every side is a polygon itself, okay? So every side of this three-dimensional shape has to be a polygon. So let me tell you what would not work. All right, let me kind of go back and show you something. All right. You know how, if you've seen silos, you know, things that you're driving through the country and silos, what they store hay in, it looks like somebody put half of the cylinder, you know, on top of a cone. Well, that would not be a polyhedron. A cylinder is not a polyhedron. And why is it not a polyhedron? It's simple and it's closed, but the sides are not line segments. Remember, that's curved, okay? So a polyhedron, every side has to be a polygon. Okay, so let's kind of go back. Let me clear that. Okay. Let's go back down to clear that off. And let's kind of go back to our prism. All right. Maybe. There it is. It was having a bad day. Okay. So it's a polyhedron. So every side's got to be a polygon. All right. Again, it's got two bases. So cylinders have two bases and prisms have two bases, two congruent bases. All right. Now, one of the things that you need to understand is, one thing is this: the two congruent bases can be any shape polyhedron, but the other sides, they're called faces, have to be parallelograms. And most of the time in elementary school, the parallelograms are rectangles because the thing is straight up and down, whether it's laying on its side, I'll show you like this one, or whether it's not laying on its side. So let me show you what I mean. Look at the sides of this. Do you see that there's a rectangle right here? There's a rectangle right there. It's sitting on a rectangle. There's a rectangle on the top, and there's two rectangles back there that you can't see. All right. Look at this shape right here. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's a hexagon. So there's a hexagon on the front and there's another hexagon on the back. So what you're going to find out in a minute is pyramids are mostly triangles and prisms are mostly rectangles. So the first thing I want you to decide, if it's not a cone and it's not a cylinder and it's not a sphere, it's either going to be a prism or a pyramid. So the way you decide is you decide if it's mostly rectangles all the way around or mostly triangles. So because this shape is mostly rectangles, first I would write down the word prism. Now, what's the word in front of it? Well, the word in front of it is named by its base. And the base is any shape that's not a rectangle. All right, so if it's mostly rectangles, then you write down its last name, so to speak, which is prism. And then you find any other shape that's not a rectangle, and that's its first name. Now, I know you say hexagon, and you might think that's hexagonal, but it's pronounced hexagonal. So this is a hexagonal prism. And see, the base is not on the bottom. Remember, I told you base doesn't mean bottom. Now, look at this one, though. This one's a rectangle on the top and the bottom and the front and the back and the side and the side. So because it's mostly rectangles, I know it's a prism. Now, sometimes it's only rectangles. If it's only rectangles, then it's a rectangular prism. Okay, so we're going to go over some different kinds in a minute, but what I need you to understand is that prisms are mostly rectangles. They're three-dimensional. So if you have a majority of rectangles, then you write down prism for the last name. If there's any shape other than a rectangle, that's its first name. If they're all rectangles, then rectangular is its first name. Okay. Now, let's go talk about pyramids and then we'll kind of compare the two. All right. So let me kind of clear this real quick. Clear the drawings. All right. A pyramid's also a polyhedron. So that means it's a three-dimensional figure. Every side is a polygon, so no curves. All right. Now this time, the majority of the things are triangles. So if I look at the shape, you see that you've got 1, 2, one in the front, one in the back, one on this side and one on this side. So I've got 4 triangles and I've got this rectangular shape down here. So when it's mostly rectangles, it's called a pyramid. And then if there's any shape besides a rectangle, then that's its first name. So see, there's a rectangle on the bottom, so that's a rectangular pyramid. Now you've seen the Egyptian pyramids, right? Those are square pyramids. So the bottom there is a square, but it's mostly triangles. So it's a square pyramid. Now look at this one. The bottom's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sides. So this bottom is a pentagon. So then there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 triangles. So what shape are most of the sides? Most of the sides are triangles. So that's why I write down pyramid. And then the only shape that's not a triangle is a pentagon. So it's a pentagonal, like the adjective for pentagon, pentagonal pyramid. Okay. Now let's kind of go practice some things. All right. Okay. So look at this one. So majority rectangles, you're going to write down prism. Majority triangles, you're going to write down pyramid. The first name is the shape of the base. And remember, base doesn't necessarily mean bottom. So I want to make sure I show you that in a minute with some other shapes. Okay. Now look at this one. Do you see that you've got a rectangle back here and a rectangle on the side, and then a rectangle right here and a rectangle in front and a rectangle on that side? See, I don't see triangles anywhere. It's not a cone, it's not a sphere, and it's not a cylinder. So it's either a prism or a pyramid. Since it was mostly rectangles, I would write down the word prism. Now, is there any shape that's not a rectangle? Yeah, remember we said it was a pentagon because it's got 5 sides. So it's a pentagonal prism. Now look at this one. See, I don't see any rectangles. This thing is mostly triangles. So if it's, see, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 triangles. So if it's mostly triangles, you write down pyramid. Is there any shape on this thing that's not a triangle? Yeah, it's got a hexagon. So that's why that's its first name, hexagonal pyramid. And remember, pyramids have 1 base, prisms have 2 bases. All right, look at this one. See, there's a square right there, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4 triangles. So it's mostly triangles, so it's a pyramid. Now, on a test, if I told you that this length was 5 inches, and I told you that this length was 5 inches, and that this length was 5 inches, and that length was 5 inches, then you would know it was a square pyramid. All right, but if I told you that this was 5 inches, but this was 4 inches, then you couldn't write down square. You'd have to write down rectangular pyramid. Okay. Now look at this one. They're all triangles. So if they're mostly triangles, you write down pyramid. So there's not a face that's anything except triangles. So when it's all triangles, it's got to be a triangular pyramid. Now, these are the 2 shapes that people get confused. Now, let me show you how I figured out what it was. This one has this one has, let me try it again, clear. All right, look at this one. This one right here has 1 rectangle. All right, might be a square, but they don't tell me for sure, so I'd have to double check. I'm just gonna put RET for rectangle. It's got 1 rectangle and it's got 4 squares. Or excuse me, 4 triangles. Put triangles. So is this thing a majority of rectangles or triangles? Well, see, it's a majority of triangles, so that's why it's a pyramid. So it's either a rectangular or square pyramid because it's got mostly triangles. But now look at this one. This one's got 2 triangles. Okay. And then it's got a rectangle in the front, a rectangle on the side, and a rectangle on the other side. So it's got 3 rectangles. So remember majority rules. So is it mostly rectangles or mostly triangles? Because it's mostly rectangles, I know it's a prism. Is there any shape that's not a rectangle? Yeah, it's got a triangle. So that's why it's a triangular prism. So if you've got rectangles and triangles, then make sure that the majority rules. If it's a majority of triangles, it's a pyramid. If it's majority of rectangles, it's going to be a prism. Okay. Now, let me clear that. And then let's go look at some others just to practice. All right, look at this one. I want to kind of show you something. Do you see how I've got all different kinds of shapes? But the majority all the way around are rectangles. The majority all the way around are rectangles. Here I've got a triangle on the top and a triangle on the bottom, but I've got 1, 2, 3 rectangles. So do you see that most of the things are prisms? All right, so that's how I know that all of these are prisms, because the majority of the sides are rectangles. Now, is there any shape that's not a rectangle? So that's a triangle. So that's a triangular prism. This has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sides. That's a pentagonal prism. This one's got 6 sides. That's a hexagonal prism. Look at this one. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, looks like 9. That'd be a nonagonal prism. All right. This one's got 8. It's an octagonal one. If you count this one, let's say I'm gonna put right there so I don't lose track. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's a decagonal prism. Okay, but I want you to notice something. Do you see the more sides that these bases have, that this prism is getting closer and closer to looking like what? A cylinder. Because if you had 100 sides, this thing would look almost exactly round. So the more sides on the base, the closer a prism gets to looking like a cylinder. All right, but it's not curved because these little segments are still straight. But when we get to volume and surface area, that's going to be important. So prisms and cylinders aren't the same because cylinders have a curve and prisms do not, but you see these start looking like more like one of those. Now, similarly, the same thing's going to happen when you start looking at pyramids and cones. All right, so look at this one. Do you see that the majority of the sides are triangles? That's why all these are pyramids. All right, now I don't know if this thing's a square. I know it's got 4 sides, so I could at least call it a quadrilateral pyramid or a rectangular pyramid. This bottom's got 6 sides, so it's a hexagonal pyramid. If you count this, there are 7 sides, so it's a remember hept meant 7, heptagonal pyramid. But again, notice, the more sides you have on the base, the closer this pyramid starts looking to a cone. And again, when we do volume and surface area later, that's going to be important. Okay, so one thing you have to do on your first test is if I give you a 3-dimensional figure, you're going to have to be able to name it. All right, now let me show you this. I'm not going to test you on this, but I do want to let you see it because you never know what might be on a praxis test or in the book that you teach from. All right, you've heard of Plato, the philosopher. All right, Plato had a theory that did not turn out to be correct, but close. He thought that different elements were made of small things that you could not see. Now, we now know he was right. You know, things are made out of atoms. All right, that part was right. But he thought when you change the thing, you change the shape of the atoms. So here's what he thought. Remember, the basic elements are fire, air, earth, and water. So he thought if you took fire and you broke it down to its smallest, minutest little particle, it would have this shape. All right, now this is called a tetrahedron. All right, now the reason it's called a tetrahedron basically is all the sides are equilateral triangles. So it's a triangular pyramid, a special kind of triangular pyramid, because every side is an equilateral triangle. Okay, he thought that if you took air and you broke it down to the smallest particle that makes up air, he thought it would have this shape. That's an octahedron. Now, the reason it's called octa is it's got 8 sides. And again, every side is an equilateral triangle. Now, you would call this a cube. His fancy word was a fancy word for a cube is a hexahedron, or you could call it a square prism. All right, so you got a lot of fancy names for it. Most of us call them cubes, but again, every side is a square, and you have 6 of those sides. Now, he thought if you took water and broke it down to its smallest piece, then basically it would have the shape of an icosahedron. So an icosahedron has 20 faces, and all of those are equilateral triangles. And then he thought if you took the whole universe, space, and its smallest particle will be a dodecahedron, and those are regular pentagons. So they're pentagons where all the sides are the same length and all the angles are the same measure. All right. So in a book, sometimes you might hear this. So on these platonic solids, every side, every face is congruent to every other face. So this is what you get when you put 4 equilateral triangles together. This is the shape you get when you put 8 equilateral triangles together. This is the shape when you put 20 equilateral triangles together. This is the shape, 3D shape you get when you put squares together, and this is the 3D shape you get when you put together regular pentagons. And regular means all sides are congruent and all angles are congruent. So that's just an interesting fact. But what you're going to have to be able to do, of course, is you're going to have to be able to name the 3-dimensional shapes. Now, let me end with this real quick. Okay. So let me stop this sharing. All right, look at this. All right, here's my vitamin C. You need to be taking vitamin C. All right, look what this is. I've got a square, I've got a rectangle in the front and the same rectangle in the back. So this rectangle in the front would be the same as this rectangle in the back. I've got a rectangle on this side and a rectangle on this side, and they match. They're exactly the same. We're going to talk about those later. They're called congruent. And the top and the bottom. Now, what is this? What are most of the sides? Aren't they rectangles? So do you understand that this would be a rectangular prism? All right, look at this one. All right, this is my T came in this. Isn't this lovely? All right, do you see that I've got a triangle in the front and a triangle here and a triangle on this side and a triangle on the back? And then I've got the bottom is a square. So this is mostly triangles. So I would know it's a what? Prism or a pyramid? Pyramid, that's right. Is there any shape on here that's not a triangle? Yeah, square. That's why it's a square pyramid. All right, I do like T, by the way. All right, look at this shape. All right, now this shape, look what happens. Now I'm gonna take this off. So, I'm gonna hold it like this so you can see it. So do you see that I've got a rectangle here and a rectangle here and a rectangle there and a rectangle? I've got rectangles all the way around. And they're not the same. This rectangle is a lot smaller than that rectangle. All right. This bottom has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 sides. And then that's the shape on the top. So what is this mostly? You see, it's mostly rectangles. So it's going to have to be a prism. That's its last name. Is there any shape on here that's not a rectangle? Yeah, I've got an octagon. So this would be an octagonal prism. Okay. So what you need to do with your students is bring in different shaped things and be looking for cool shapes. Give them points for bringing in cool 3-dimensional shapes and being able to name them. So this is your video on three-dimensional shapes. The next video you're going to watch is on measurement. So I'm going to make one that's the English system, which is what you're more familiar with. Then I'm going to move to the metric system. Now, the English system and the metric system are not going to be on your first test. All right, so this video stops the material on your first test. All right, so your first test basically stops with the three-dimensional shapes. So it's basically going to cover chapter 11 out of your book. And we'll talk about it during our Zoom class about exactly what's on there. Okay, I'll see you in class.